समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
The story came to Arthur Connolly secondhand from a Persian friend who'd wandered through the slave market in Bukhara sometime in 1830. Read it out. I again stopped to watch a bargain that Nozbek was driving for a very beautiful Persian girl. So beautiful, I beg leave to state, that I have not seen the like. A neck a cubit long, eyes as large as this cup. Her tears fell like the rain in spring, and she was altogether so lost in grief that she appeared bereft of her senses. Her master treated her with the grossest brutality, making her rise and uncover herself, that her intended purchaser might see the beauty of her person. Further to the south, a sharp-featured stranger from Delhi was encountering much the same experience. This is his story. The merchants were shouting, "This is the lad or girl for so much money." A man came to buy a slave girl and took her behind the wall of the slave shop to examine her body. When her veil was lifted up by the seller and gradually her cap and sheet, the woman, turning her face towards the sky, began to rend the air by her screams. She was sold for 310 rupees. Thank you for joining this episode of The Print Explorer. And for those of you who are regular viewers, a special thanks. This episode isn't, as you might think, about the slave markets of 19th century Central Asia, which trafficked, kidnapped children, women, and men from across Persia and the wider region. In fact, this episode isn't about Central Asia at all, though that's the backdrop for my story. You see, the man who wrote that first account, Captain Connolly, ended up dead, beheaded outside the fort in Bukhara. The second, the Indian spy, lived a long and full life. The reason I picked up these two stories this week is because of news Delhi University is considering dropping courses on Pakistan, Islam, and China from its curriculum. I'm guessing the Indian spy, the great Mohanlal Zucchi or Mohanlal Kashmiri, would have been at least as appalled by this decision as I am. To successfully secure India, we need more students receiving a far better quality of education in exactly these subjects and others which concern our neighborhood. Mohanlal Zucchi survived Central Asia because he had knowledge. Captain Connolly died because he didn't. Already, there is a crippling shortage of fluent linguists to serve the intelligence services, and that's in the bigger regional languages, let alone minor ones. And the number of world-class PhDs India produces on its neighborhood is negligible compared with the work being done at better funded and resourced universities in the West and China. Arguably India's greatest spy, Mohanlal Zucchi, grew up not very far from where I live in Delhi, learned Persian at home, and received an English modern education at what was then called Delhi College and is today the Zakir Hussain Delhi College, and went on to have a stellar career as an undercover operative in Central Asia, Afghanistan, and Persia. He helped the British conquer Afghanistan, salvage the situation from the ruins of utter defeat, ransom prisoners, and bargained with rulers. In 1877, Zucchi, though many of people just knew him as Aga Hassan Jan or Mirza Quli Kashmiri, passed away in a Haveli somewhere near the Azadpur wholesale fruit market. I hope someone watching this episode knows someone who can erect a fitting memorial to this great practitioner of the art of espionage. Yes, he served foreign masters, but he was an Indian and a genius. And these things deserve to be remembered. As usual, I've relied on the work of many brilliant scholars for this episode. Those are hyperlinked throughout the text version. I've also pulled out a few top reads which you can find in the comment section below. Espionage is fundamentally about knowing things your adversaries don't want you to know, or perhaps don't even know themselves about themselves. It's about discovery. And in the mid 19th century, there was a lot Imperial Britain wanted to discover. Though the occasional trader and missionary had journeyed across the Himalayas into Central Asia and Tibet, there was desperately thin information on viable military routes, passes through the high mountains through which threats could appear, and the peoples who lived there. The very first step was to make a map. And at the end of 1800, the East India Company started what we now to call the Great Trigonometrical Survey. The story of that survey, which spanned over 8 decades, I'll return to some other time. From the middle of the century, though, the surveyors were running into the Great Mountains, and it became clear that the British personnel operating outside the protection of the Raj were at enormous personal risk. Among the stories which proved that most dramatically was that of Arthur Connolly himself. A captain in the 6th Bengal Light Cavalry in the service of the British East India Company, Connolly had famously travelled from Moscow in 1829, traversing Central Asia and Afghanistan before returning to British India 2 years later. Then in 1841, he was sent out on another mission into the region, this time intended to persuade the emirates of the area to set aside their differences and unite against the southward expansion of the Tsars of Russia. The mission was an utter disaster. In 1841, Connolly attempted to rescue a fellow officer, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Stoddart, who had been imprisoned by the Emir of Bukhara. The two were executed by beheading by the Emir, Nasrullah Khan, on charges of spying for the British. The date of the killing, 4th June 1842, is significant. You see, the first war between the Emir of Afghanistan and the East India Company had just ended, and the Emir saw Western travellers through his territories as a threat now. What the British had done to Afghanistan, he feared, they might consider doing to Bukhara. 4 years after these killings, the remarkable missionary Joseph Wolfe retraced the journey of the officers in an effort to establish the truth about their deaths. Less than 7 days from Bukhara, a Jewish friend counseled him, "For God's sake, do not go to Bukhara. Stoddart has been put to death, Connolly also. And some years before both of them, Lieutenant Wybird, who was on his way to Khiva, but was brought to Bukhara and put in prison there. And some years after that, his throat was cut. And 5 other Englishmen have been put to death at the gates of Jiharju only 10 months ago." Poor Connolly, poor Connolly, poor Connolly was dragged to the place of execution, the Jew said. His last words were, "Wail, wail, wail, ki aftadam bedaste sazalem. Woe to me, that I have fallen in the hands of a tyrant." Now, losing intelligence agents at this rate was clearly not an effective means of pursuing espionage, and the British had begun turning to Indians for help. A new cadre called the Pandits had been already raised to travel the region, taking precise geographical measurements with concealed instruments. In 1863, disguised as a merchant, Abdul Hamid first entered the city of Yarkand. Following behind him was Nain Singh, an ethnic Bhutia from Kumaon, who entered Tibet. The men had been equipped with a prismatic compass and then were drilled. Think about how tough this must have been to march a mile in precisely 2,000 paces, no matter what the terrain. Finally, they were instructed on the use of a sextant to take meridian altitudes and so determine latitude. Each Pandit who followed them deserves books about their feats alone. Mirza Shuja produced a route survey of 2,179 miles, the most important section being the 1,042 miles from Kabul via Kashgar to Yarkand, about 350 miles of which was completely unknown to colonial authorities. Havildar Haidar Shah, posing as a falcon buyer, surveyed the wilderness of Dir and Swat in what is now Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, crossing glaciers and discovering the passes across the Hindu Kush. His assistant Atta Muhammad, who posed as an itinerant mullah, mapped the Kunar River. These were high standards to top, but Mohanlal Zucchi would do it. In February 1833, Aga Hassan Jan, as he was called, stood in the court of Persia's Prince Royal Abbas Mirza at Mashhad, facing a barrage of questions on the wealth and power of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Abbas Mirza harbored dreams of planting his standard in Kashmir, but the young Indian Shia standing in front of him would not be cowed. Even the floor of Ranjit Singh's camp, he said, was covered with fine Kashmiri shawls, and, I quote, "As for his army, if Sardar Hari Singh, his commander-in-chief, were to cross the Indus, your Highness would soon be glad to make good his retreat." This was not the kind of language Abbas Mirza was used to, even if it was delivered very politely. He told his courtiers, "See the effects of an English education, how inscrutable are the decrees of Providence, which has conferred so much power on an infidel." That young man, of course, wasn't a Shia from India and had nothing to do with Ranjit Singh's court. He was Mohanlal Zucchi. Endowed with a genius for traitor making, as Sir John William Kay recorded, Zucchi was selected by the East India Company's Secret Service for the first of its wars with Afghanistan. The company had come to believe that force was necessary to stop Afghanistan's Amir, Dost Muhammad, from cutting deals with Russia and Persia. To ensure this did not happen, it finally mounted a full-scale invasion. The East India Company profited from Dost Muhammad's failures to unite the ethnic groups of the north, the Uzbek, the Tajik, the Hazara, to fight against the invaders. To make things worse for him, the British, through Mohanlal, had been paying sizable bribes to the ethnic Pashtun Khans who controlled the logistics routes from Peshawar to Kandahar and then on to Kabul. The Persian-speaking Shia population of the cities generally supported the British, seeing in them protection against the Pashto-speaking Sunni Pashtun. Zucchi bribed and bargained with local chieftains to ease General Alexander Burns' capture of Kabul, a campaign that succeeded almost without opposition, as one tribe after another betrayed the Amir. Following a year of desultory warfare, Dost Muhammad suddenly surrendered to Sir William Macnaghten and was sent into exile. Lord Auckland, the viceroy, had planned to place Shah Shuja on the throne in Kabul and then withdraw British troops, leaving a friendly king as an ally to help thwart Tsarist ambitions in Central Asia. But Shah Shuja had no legitimacy among the tribes and clans, and so had to keep on being propped up by British bayonets. Then Zucchi began cautioning his masters of growing tensions. Local chieftains started becoming very irked by the violation of promises as the East India Company slashed the subsidies because it had tired of the cost of maintaining the occupation. Implementing economic policies that bred rural hardship and angering local residents by womanizing and drunkenness, the image of the British Army in Kabul further deteriorated. Zucchi's warnings, though, were ignored, with catastrophic consequences. In 1841, British forces finally began withdrawal from Kabul. The original British force to enter the Afghan territory was about 10,000 plus 6,000 men of Shah Shuja, and at least some 38,000 camp followers and 30,000 camels, which gives you some picture of what an army was like at that time. By the end of 1839, the families of many British officers, as well as British and Indian other ranks, had come up to Kabul, some travelling with crystal, chandeliers, heirloom furniture and choice wines, the latter of course being nothing new, for many of the officers in the original force had come with well-stocked cellars. The Queen's 16th Lancers, incidentally, brought up their foxhounds, which survived even during the desperate trek from Firozpur across Sindh and over the Bolan and Khojak passes to Quetta and then Kandahar. Each British officer had several servants. Lady Sale, her daughter, son-in-law and a bachelor officer shared a compound in Kabul and had 40 native servants between them. The sound of high tea, cricket, boating, amateur theatricals, and horse racing echoed fully in the England away from England atmosphere until suddenly the assassination of Sir Alexander Burnes, Lieutenant Charles Burnes, his younger brother, Major William Broadfoot, and assorted retainers on the 2nd of November. The British force left Kabul on 6 January 1842 after these assassinations, and in spite of attempts to give the British some protection, they could not control the truculent Ghilzai and other tribes. In addition, the British refused to give up their arms and ammunition or initially to accept an offer to turn over all married men and their families as hostages. As events developed, all this made little difference to the main force. Afghan initiative, the weather, the extreme cold that is, the shattered morale of the troops, and the panic of the camp followers doomed the retreat, which quickly became a rout and then an utter massacre. Following the imperial army's near annihilation, Zucchi stayed on in Kabul, continuing to play a key role, ransoming prisoners destined for Central Asian slave markets from captivity. He also bargained with the different actors to try and mitigate the incredible hardships that the captives were being subjected to. In 1844, on a tour of Europe, Zucchi was invited to meet with Queen Victoria and dined with Frederick William IV of Prussia. He was even awarded high honors by nations he had spied against. He was made Knight of the Persian Order of the Lion by Abbas Mirza and given an Order of the Durrani Empire from Shah Shuja-ul Malik. In 1877, Aga Hassan Jan, or Zucchi if you prefer, was buried in his garden Lal Bagh at Azadpur on what was then on the highway from Delhi to Panipat and is today the site of the city's wholesale fruit market. Haidari Begum, one of his 17 spouses and many more mistresses, was buried along with him. There's no more ironclad rule to international relations than this one. The closing of a nation's mind is the certain route to defeat. The British learned that lesson when they were annihilated in 1841 after failing to listen to spies like Zucchi. The existence of the Pandits represents the other side of the story. The East India Company was at its most effective when it recruited local knowledge and opened itself up to advice. Indian universities should now be embracing 100 new courses on Pakistan, China, on political Islam, on our wider region, the Middle East and Central Asia. They should be hiring the best talent possible, no matter what their political views, and ensuring there's enough funding for students to pursue long programs of higher studies abroad, not shutting down programs because they're politically uncomfortable. And they should be recruiting the very best talent possible for the organizations and institutions responsible for framing and executing regional policy, not relying on a factory line process that produces bureaucrats. I'm Praveen Swami. Thank you for watching this episode of The Print Explorer.